But first, that wild story that tangles up the world's richest man, America's most famous tabloid, a longtime friend turned witness against President Trump, maybe even the rulers of Saudi Arabia. It all began last month when the National Enquirer published text messages between Amazon's founder Jeff Bezos and his mistress, Lauren Sanchez. A revelation that Bezos, who also owns the Washington Post, tried to preempt by announcing the end of his marriage. Then late this week, Bezos went public again, writing on Medium that agents for the National Enquirer and its parent company, AMI, threatened to release additional texts and explicit photos unless Bezos said publicly that the Enquirer's story about him was, quote, not politically motivated. Instead of bowing to the demand, Bezos lashed back. Of course, I don't want personal photos published, but I also won't participate in their well-known practice of blackmail, political favors, political attacks, and corruption. Bezos is also investigating why he was a target of the Enquirer. And his post references AMI chairman David Pecker's close friendship with President Trump and the Washington Post coverage of Jamal Khashoggi's murder by operatives tied to the Saudi crown prince. Quote, an AMI leader advised us that Mr. Pecker is apoplectic about our investigation. For reasons still to be better understood, the Saudi angle seems to hit a particularly sensitive nerve. Federal prosecutors are now reviewing the Bezos accusations, which could jeopardize AMI's existing immunity deal, in which the company admitted to quashing damaging stories about Trump to help his presidential campaign. That is some of the background. Here to respond, David Pecker's attorney, Elkan Abramowitz. Thank you for joining us.
Morning, George.
This morning, right out there, Jeff Bezos says extortion, blackmail.
It absolutely is not extortion and not blackmail. What happened was the story was given to the National Enquirer by a reliable source that had given information to the National Enquirer for 7 years prior to this story. It was a source that was well known to both Mr. Bezos and Ms. Sanchez.
Was it Michael Sanchez?
I can't discuss who the source was. It's confidential within AMI, so I'm not going to answer who the source was. It was somebody close to both Bezos and Ms. Sanchez.
Let me show some of the correspondence that Mr. Bezos published. He had this was a letter from AMI's lawyer, John Fine, the deputy counsel, and it lays out two of the conditions he was setting. One, a public acknowledgement from the Bezos parties that they have no knowledge or basis for suggesting that AMI's coverage was politically motivated or influenced by political forces. And then, point three, AM agrees not to publish, distribute, share, or describe unpublished texts and photos. That seems like a pretty clear offer. AMI won't publish these photos if they get this statement from Bezos.
George, you have to understand the context. The story was already out, and there were...
Not the photos.
Not those photos. I think there were some photos that were in the original story. I think both Bezos and AMI had interests in resolving their differences. Bezos didn't want another story written about him or those pictures published. AMI did not want to have the libel against them that this was inspired by the White House, inspired by Saudi Arabia, or inspired by the Washington Post. It had nothing to do with it. It was a usual story that that National Enquirer gets from reliable sources.
The National Enquirer believes that these photos were newsworthy. Yet they're offering there not to publish them in return for a thing of value from Jeff Bezos, letting go of the legal liabilities, saying that it wasn't politically motivated. How is that not extortion?
That is not extortion because all that AMI wanted was the truth. Bezos and Ms. Sanchez knew who the source was. Any investigator that was going to investigate this knew who the source was. It was not the White House. It was not Saudi Arabia. And the libel that was going out there slamming AMI was that this was all a political hatchet job sponsored by either a foreign nation or somebody politically in this country. That is something that, and the story was already published. It's a news decision to decide how long you can go with the same story, so that each side, it was part of a legitimate negotiation. Each side had something that they wanted.
A source close to those conversations, familiar with those conversations, says this was a crime, not a negotiation.
The source is totally wrong. It's absolutely not a crime to ask somebody to simply tell the truth. Tell the truth that this was not politically motivated, and we will print no more stories.
If you don't say what you want us to say, we're going to publish these photos.
That's not it's part of a negotiation. Look, it's a news decision to decide how many times you're going to write the same story. The story was already out there. I think people misunderstand that this was a post-publication negotiation to resolve any of the outstanding issues. AMI was being blamed.
The clear threat was that there would be a new story coming.
The clear threat from Bezos' point of view is that we're going to link you to Saudi Arabia. We're going to say that you hacked all of these texts. We're going to slander the publication as much as we can. So that's why lawyers sit down and lawyers negotiate to try to resolve differences. That's exactly what this was.
How is that journalism, though? If you believe the photos are newsworthy, how is it journalism to say we're not going to publish this if you give us something we want?
Is it journalism to decide not to print the story 3 times? If the story was out there, there may be a different argument if we were talking about prior to the first publication, where hypothetically somebody could say, you give me $1 million and we won't publish this. That's not what this is. The story was already there. And then the issue was how much wasn't printed in the first story. You can make journalistic decisions as to how many times you're going to write the same story. That's not the job of the prosecutors or anybody else to determine.
You said the source is someone who's been a reliable source to AMI, also close to
7 years.
Ms. Sanchez. Jeff Bezos' security consultant, Gavin Becker, has publicly named Michael Sanchez, the brother of Lauren Sanchez, as a possible target of his investigation. Now, Michael Sanchez is a vocal supporter of President Trump, an acquaintance of Roger Stone and Carter Page, and he told, the Washington Post reported that he was told by multiple people at American media that the National Enquirer set out to do, quote, a takedown to make Trump happy. Is that true? It's
not true. This was a source that had been giving information to the National Enquirer for 7 years. It was a person that was known to both Bezos and Ms. Sanchez, therefore giving his information more credibility, and that's exactly what happened.
You're not denying that it's Michael Sanchez, and Michael Sanchez told the Washington Post that the National Enquirer set out to do a takedown to make Trump happy. That's what he was told by people at American media.
I'm not going to comment on what Michael Sanchez said. I'm not permitted to tell you or confirm or deny who the source is. I can tell you it's not Saudi Arabia, it's not President Trump, it's not Roger Stone, but I cannot tell you who the sources.
Up on page 2 of the program, we showed that piece from Jeff Bezos' post where he said that an AMI leader advised us that Mr. Pecker is apoplectic about our investigations for reasons still to be better understood. The Saudi angle seems to hit a particularly sensitive nerve. And I just want to run through some of the timeline here. Back in July 2017, David Pecker was at the White House with a man named Casey Grine, who's a Saudi advisor to the Saudi royal family. I think we have a picture of Mr. Grine there in the Oval Office back in the summer of 2017. That picture comes from something that AMI published in March 2018, a 100-page glossy about the virtues of Saudi Arabia. Printed 200,000 copies. And then on basically the same day that the Jeff Bezos piece was published, AMI closed on a $450 million restructuring of its debt.
Yeah.
Did any of that money come from Saudi Arabia?
Zero.
Not a penny?
Not a penny.
So it
never has. AMI sought financing from the Saudis, but never obtained any, doesn't have any Saudi Arabian financing.
Well, why did AMI National Enquirer, David Pecker, publish this 100-page glossy about Saudi Arabia?
That's a journalistic decision that they made. There's nothing illegal about it, nothing to do with anything that this investigation is about.
Not an attempt.
It was published in March of 2018.
Not an attempt to curry favor with Saudi Arabia?
Not that I'm aware of, and it was published. There were journalistic reasons for publishing it that have nothing to do with any of what we're talking about.
Do you know how it did? It's $13.50 a copy. It's a pretty steep price.
I really don't know. I didn't buy it, but I don't know.
Ronan Farrow and others have come out since the Jeff Bezos post with a number of charges about AMI as well. Here's Ronan Farrow saying, I and at least one other prominent journalist involved in breaking stories about the National Enquirer with Trump's fielded similar "stop digging or we'll ruin you" blackmail efforts from AMI. Ted Brydas of the AP. We were warned explicitly by insiders that AMI had hired private investigators to dig into the backgrounds of AP journalists. The Daily Beast, in the process of reporting the Bezos stories, the Daily Beast and a member of its staff were threatened by AMI's attorney. This seems like a pattern of practice, according to those journalists.
I've never heard of any of those allegations. I am not aware of any attempt by employees of AMI to blackmail or to commit any crime at all.
Are you worried at all that these revelations have put the cooperation agreement of Mr. Pecker with the Southern District in jeopardy?
Absolutely not. We have an agreement with an understanding with the Southern District. I can't comment on it. I am not concerned that any of this...
They've spoken to you since this came out?
I'm not going to comment on any contacts with the Southern District.
Another billionaire, Peter Thiel, brought down Gawker. Are you worried at all that Jeff Bezos will bring down the National Enquirer?
I really can't comment on that. We just want Bezos to acknowledge the results of that investigation, which will show that politics had nothing to do with this story. It was a typical National Enquirer story.
Mr. Abramowitz, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.